Welcome to e-classroom learning. We will be covering chapter 24.1, reproduction in flowering plants. Objectives: identify the functions and various structures in a flower. Explain how fertilization differs between angiosperms and other plants. Describe vegetative reproduction. First, we need to look at the structures of the flower to understand function. Two structures we want to first look at working our outside from the outside in. First is the sepals, that being the ordinary leaves that are going to form the flower bud before it blooms, and then as it blooms, it's going to be located at the bottom here, right there. The petals are the brightly colored structures that are going to attract animals, and these are located inside the sepals. Male gametophyte is really two structures. It's going to be a filament and an anther, and it's going to look like this, filament being the long tube, anther being this portion here that's going to sit on top. Female gametophyte is also going to be two structures. Now it's got two different names, carpels and pistils. They're similar names. They both represent the female gametophyte. And it's going to be, the structure is going to be a little bit similar to that of the male gametophyte, but it's going to vary a little bit different. It is going to consist of a style and a stigma there. Stigma is the structure that is going to attract the pollen, and it's going to look like this. So here's the pistil or the carpel. The stigma is going to be this portion up here, kind of the sticky surface. Then you have this style here. And those are the different parts. Male and female parts. So those three parts making up the female. Of course, you have the ovary here, this part here, and these parts in here being the ovule. Now, varieties, you have really three different varieties. Most in typical flowering plants are going to have both the male and female gametophytes. Okay, but you do have some plants such as this here, this plant over here. This is called a passion flower, I believe is what it's called. But you can see the female gametophytes here. You can see the male gametophyte there. So you can see both of the gametophytes in a flower. You also have plants here that are going to have one flower being male, one flower being female, and can't really tell in here, but this is an iris. You see these lines here. It's pretty much dictating the insects where to go, but they have male flowers and female flowers. And then you have this queen's lace over here that they pretty much fuse together. They or grow so close together that it comes, they form pretty much one, and it looks like lace. That's why it's called queen's lace. Angiosperm life cycle. We need to talk about the male gametophyte and development and the female gametophyte development. Pollen grains are going to develop inside the anther. Spores are going to be released. Meiosis is going to produce 4 haploid spore cells. Each cell will then go through mitotic division and produce pollen grain that is protected from dryness and damage. Makes sense since it's exposed to the environment. You don't want it to dry out and get damaged. And pretty much you're going to have 2 cells that are going to be distributed and used to pollinate. The development of the female gametophyte is going to develop in the carpel. The ovules, okay, which are here. These things here are going to be the seeds. Those will eventually be fertilized and develop into seeds. And then you get the protective ovary, which is going to be the fruit portion of the flower. And that's this green, fleshy or green substance here. So that will develop into the fruit. How this goes is a single diploid cell goes through meiosis, produce 4 haploid cells, totally normal. But what happens is you get 3 that are going to disintegrate. Those 3 aren't going to be used. The remaining cell then it goes through mitosis, producing 8 nuclei, forming the embryo sac, which we will talk about here. So pollination is the process of transferring pollen to female portion or pollen to stigma. 2 ways it does that. wind, wind pollination, and it's not very effective. One, it needs to be windy, so it needs to have ideal conditions, and two, it has to produce a large amount of pollen in order for it to happen. What happens is wind blows, and wherever it lands, it lands. Animal pollination, more effective. You have animals that are going to deposit pollen to female portion of the plant, and it acts as a mutualistic relationship. The pollen produces, or the fruit produces food for the animal, and the animal then produces reproduction for the plant. So once you have pollination, then you get to fertilization. Pollen is going to land on the stigma of the same species, begin to grow in what is a pollen tube. And what happens is you form this embryo sac, and in the embryo sac you get double fertilization. First is normal. Okay, sperm is going to fuse with egg to make the zygote. This is going to make a diploid cell, your normal cell that would grow in an organism. And then the other remaining sperm is going to fuse with two polar nuclei to make a triploid cell. And why that's important, because that forms here the endosperm, which nourishes the seed. So looking at this, so you can see the diagram here. This is your flower. Here's your anther and your male gametophyte. So the anther, you're having the pollen that is going to be produced here inside the anther. It gets released. Here the N is a haploid cell. It's going to go through mitosis, split into two. So now you can see that there's two. Okay, that's what these little nuclei mean. Okay, that is going to be placed on the stigma. Then that is going to move through the pollen tube. That's kind of just what this is showing. So you can see here, so the ovule here is the female. That female is going to develop into a megaspore, which is going to form the embryo sac. Then you have the male gametophyte, or the pollen, that is going to be and reach the ovule, which is happening here. So the egg nucleus, which is this embryo sac, and the pollen, which comes through this pollen tube and into the embryo sac. You're going to have one that is discharged into the embryo sac, the other into the egg nucleus. And then that's what fertilization happens. You have the endosperm that is going to form a triploid cell. This little thing here is going to form pretty much food supply, as you can see here. And then you have the zygote that is going to form the plant. So you have the embryo that's going to form around this food supply, as well as a seed coat into eventually germinating seed, which we will cover in 24.2. So vegetative reproduction, it's a little bit different process, as this is not a sexual reproduction process. This is asexual. So with asexual, you have, and you're going to take a single plant and pretty much take a cutting from it or some sort of piece of that plant and produce the same identical plant, since it's going to have the same exact DNA. Types, so you can take seedlings, roots, stems, leaves. Okay, asexual produces identical plants, but it needs it needs favorable conditions. This process, because of the favorable conditions, it's going to be more rapid than that of normal sexual reproduction. It doesn't require a mate, and you don't get the seed. You get growth from what are meristems. So plant propagation, two ways of doing it: cutting it, where you cut off a part of the stem with the meristem left. Remember, this is the area of rapid growth, so you plant this with this part of the plant with this left, you're going to get growth. And then also you have grafting. Grafting is taking a piece of stem cut from a parent plant and attaching it to another plant. Okay, this process is important because it's not going to produce seeds. You're taking a plant from one, or part of plant from one species and another species, fusing them together, and you're not going to create a plant. So you will not create seeds. So this plant is deemed sterile, and that's how you make your seedless watermelons, any fruits or vegetables without your seeds. Thank you for tuning in to 24.1, and we will cover 24.2 next.